can't handle the truth.
Today we're going to be talking about the resolutions of the Xbox One versus the PS4. And I want everybody to understand, I already know what's going on with Assassin's Creed. Xbox fans, you need to understand that your system is accountable. Your system can't produce good 1080p titles. You know, most of the games that do get 1080p are games that are supposed to. Games that are pushing the envelope do not reach 1080p on your system. There is a problem. You should not be laid back, and this video is going to prove there's a problem. You know, there's a lot of fucking games that we're going to go down in this list provided by IGN themselves, showing the differences of resolutions for next gen titles for the PS4 and the Xbox One. First off, let's scroll down here. We have Alien Isolation. This 1080p, 30 frames per second on both systems. But the second game, right? This is where it gets funny. The second game, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, 900p. I just also learned that it reached the tops of 900p on Watch Dogs, and then I think it was a couple other titles. It's Ubisoft and EA where you're gonna see 900p games on the PS4. But right now you can see with a patch, it got the 1080p on a PS4. Battlefield, 720p on the Xbox One, 900p on the PS4. Battlefield Hardline, 900p on the Xbox One. They achieved that 1080p on the PS4. So they moved up in resolution for both consoles, but still maintain that 1080p, which gives the PS4 a huge lead right now already. Now we go the Blacklight Retribution. That's a PS4 exclusive. It's also on PC, but it's on the PS4 for consoles. 1080p, 60 frames per second. Here we go again. Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, 900p on the Xbox One, 1080p on a PS4. Scroll down a little bit more. We already knew to deal with Ghost. Actually, Ghost is a lower resolution on the Xbox One than Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, so I guess I could commend whoever's over there at Activision. But Call of Duty Ghost for the Xbox One, 720p, PS4 version, 1080p. Dead Rising, Xbox One exclusive, Dead Rising, 720p, 30 frames per second. Destiny, both 1080p on both consoles. Diablo, 1080p on both consoles, but on the Xbox One, it probably used to be a 900p game, but they said it's 1080p with a patch. So might have been a day one patch. They give it that resolution. Dying Light, 1080p on both. Another EA game, 900p on both systems. This is EA Sports UFC. As you know, most of these 900p games I don't even fucking own. Actually, I don't own any 900p games. Any of these games that were 900p, I do not own and have not paid for this generation, and will not. Um, okay, FIFA, 1080p on both. Flower, that's a PS4 exclusive. That's 1080p. Forza Horizon 2, 1080p. And then you got Forza. What up? What? Forza Horizon 2 is 1080p, 30 frames per second, but Forza Motorsport 5 was 60 frames per second. All you Xbox fans was bashing Drive Club for being a 1080p, 30 frames per second racing game, but your brand new racing game is 1080p, 30 frames per second. It's the same fucking resolution. I just spotted that. And we all know that Forza Motorsport 5, it was 720p if you play offline. But thanks to the little DRM trick, you can't play that game offline, so you had to play it online all the time, and that's why I got that 1080p. Um, Golf Club, a golf game, 720p on the Xbox One, 1080p on the PS4. And yes, we're gonna go down this whole list. I want to humiliate the fuck out of these Xbox fans. Grand Theft Auto 5, it's at a default of 1080p. Nobody has got a confirmation from Rockstar if that is the case, but we already know on the PS4 it can achieve that, and they know the PS4 will sell more copies, so I doubt that they would cut any corners. We already know Halo is fuck. Halo should be fucking 1080p, 60 frames per second. It's not a difficult game to fucking remaster. Infamous Second Son, we already know that's a 1080p game. Killer Instinct, Another Xbox One exclusive. 720p, 60 frames per second. We already know about Killzone. That's 1080p. You can say what you want. It says 1080p, 30 frames per second single player, and it's actually not that resolution. Because if you actually look at everything, it's not fucking that. It's actually higher than that. So here we go. Connect Sports 1080p, NAC 1080p. Here we go. Lords of the Fallen 900p on the Xbox One, 1080p on the PS4. I did not know Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes is 720p on the Xbox One, 1080p on the PS4. Did not know that. Huh. Learning some new shit. Okay. Whoa. Metro Redux was 912p on the Xbox One, 1080p on the PS4. MLB The Show is a PS4 exclusive, so that's 1080p by default. Oh, there we go. I was looking for this one. Middle Earth, right? Even IGN knows the truth. 900p on the Xbox One, 1080p on the PS4. I'm excited because Zaire's bitch dumbass, fucking cookie face motherfucker, and Crap Gamer's fake ass. They both said that the Xbox One version of those games was 1080p, and it's not true. Shadow of Mordor on the Xbox One is 900p. It's stated right here. Minecraft 1080p. What? Murdered Soul Suspect is 1080p on both systems, but on the Xbox One it's 30 frames per second. On the PS4 it's 60 frames per second. So even small developer, well, small, big developers, triple A, double A developers, whatever, if they can achieve that 1080p 60 frames per second, they will do it. NBA 2K14 1080p 60 frames per second on both systems. Need for Speed Rivals 1080p 30 frames per second on both systems. Plants vs. Zombie. It was exclusive to Xbox One. Also, it was on the PC, but they want to call it an Xbox One exclusive at that time. At that time, and always and forever, that game will be 900p, 60 frames per second on the Xbox One. When it came over to the PS4 a year later, 1080p, 60 frames per second. PlanetSide 2, 1080p, exclusive, so that's a default. Pro Evolution Soccer, 720p 60 frames per second on the Xbox One, 1080p 60 frames per second on the PS4. Outlast 1080p on both systems. Project Cars 1080p on both systems. Rasengan Resogun. I'm saying Rasengan like I'm Naruto or some stupid shit. Okay, that's 1080p. That's exclusive. Here we go. Rise, Son of Rome, 900p 30 frames per second. This game is now on that PC with a higher resolution and probably a frame rate. Just letting you guys know. Shadow Warrior. I don't really know what this game is. 900p 60 frames per second on the Xbox One. 1080p 60 frames per second on the PS4. Okay, Swamp Force 1080p on both consoles. Sniper Elite 3 1080p on both consoles. Sunset Overdrive Xbox One exclusive. Again, 900p, 30 frames per second. Open world game. Not justified because Infamous Second Son is higher resolution. And it's open world also. The Crew. We have a default here of 1080p, but the game has just been recently delayed. So I can't really take word for that because it's Ubisoft. They just downgraded Assassin's Creed from 1080p 60 frames per second all the way down to 900p 30 frames per second. So we can't really trust this right now because Drive Club, I didn't say Drive Club. The Crew has been delayed. So by default, we already know The Last of Us is 1080p 60 frames per second. That wasn't a fucking no-brainer. Sony came out and confirmed that already, as well as Naughty Dog. Especially their next project was Uncharted 4. It's going to be 1080p 60 frames per second, and I'm pretty sure they won't come around in the next couple months and say, oh, we can't do it. It's going to be 900p 30 frames per second like Ubisoft, which has no fucking skill in making games anymore. They're not credible. The Order, because of the camera size that they're using, it says 800p, but I don't know how to really talk about that. It's the camera size that they're using, because they're using like a cinematic type look to it. I really can't explain that one. Witcher, they haven't. The people at Witcher have not came out and confirmed anything about their resolution, so we can't really take that for true. Thief, 900p, 30 frames per second, and then on the PS4, 1080p, 30 frames per second. So once again, PS4 wins that one. Titanfall, 792p, 60 frames per second. So even though the order has an awkward camera size or screen size, it still has a higher resolution than Titanfall. So, still a win. A win is a win. Tomb Raider, here we go. Definitive Edition. 1080p at 30 frames per second on the Xbox One with 900p 30 frames per second cutscenes. The PS4 version, native 1080p 60 frames per second throughout the whole game. Trials Fusion, easy ass game to master. Definitely could have did 1080p. I don't know why they didn't on the Xbox One, but it's 900p 60 frames per second on the Xbox One. And it says here with a patch, so it probably used to be 720p. Is it a lie? Can you believe it? Yes, you can. You saw the history so far. 1080p 60 frames per second on a PS4, of course. Trine, it's exclusive to the PS4. They say 1080p 60 frames per second 2D. 720p 30 frames per second 3D. I don't know what's the difference is. I don't know what that shit's about. What is this? Uncharted 4, Thief's End, 1080p 60 frames per second. That's a PS4 exclusive, of course. And Warframe on Xbox One, it is 1080p 30 frames per second. On the PS4, it is 1080p 60 frames per second. A win is a win, guys. Don't be ass hurt. And we're getting down to the last game, so let's just do it real quick right here. War Thunder, 1080p 60 frames per second. That's a PS4 exclusive, also on the PC. Watch Dogs, didn't know this one. 792p 30 frames per second on the Xbox One. 900p 30 frames per second on the PS4. Wolfenstein, 1080p 60 frames per second dynamic buffer, frame buffer. What is this? 960 by 1080 at 60 frames per second in some areas. And right here you can see it's a steady 1080p 60 frames per second through the whole fucking game. And WWE 2K15 1080p on both consoles. So as you guys know and see the truth, the Xbox One is ass. And I can't wait for IGN to update this list with more Assassin's Creed stuff, especially Unity being confirmed at 900p. Um, I'm not buying that game. I wouldn't recommend any of you guys to buy that game. The point of this whole video is proving that it is possible on a PS4 to do higher resolutions. You know, it if they it's true that they could have did 1080p because they patched this Assassin's Creed with a 1080p patch, and they couldn't do that with the Xbox One. The ability clearly was there to give a patch, but they just could not reach that resolution. So I just don't understand. You know, they rather piss people off and take money from Microsoft for obvious reasons than just be true like all these other third-party developers that made their version on the PS4 better than the Xbox One version. Simple as that. Well, I'll be seeing you guys very, very soon. You guys have a good night. I'm going to go finish watching Gotham on Fox.